The air was thick with summer heat and expectation. My graduation cap still sat crooked on my desk, untouched since the ceremony. I stood in the kitchen, heart pounding, while my parents stared at me like I'd just confessed to a crime. "I'm not going to law school this fall," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I want to take a gap year, just to work, build up my platform, see if you want to be a dropout." My father cut in, his eyes narrowing behind his glasses. "Throw away your future for some computer hobby." "It's not a hobby," I replied. "I've been building this AI platform for 2 years. It's already showing traction, if I just had time enough." His palms slammed the counter so hard the salt shaker rattled. "We've already paid your first semester at Chapel Hill Law. This isn't a negotiation." I looked at my mother silently, pleading for her to say something softer. But she just folded her arms and said, "Ava never made us feel this way." Ava? My perfect older sister, lawyer by 25, wedding in Forbes magazine, baby on the way. I was the mess in comparison, always. "I'm not Ava," I said quietly. "No," my father snapped. "You're not." Ava respected us. Ava followed through. Ava didn't think she was too special to follow the plan. "I'm not trying to disrespect you," I said, swallowing the tremble in my voice. "I just want to do something I believe in." "Then do it somewhere else," he said, coldly. "You want independence. You've got 1 hour to pack and leave this house." I stared at him. "You're serious?" He didn't blink. "Dead serious." My mother turned and walked upstairs like it was settled. I stood frozen for a second longer, then walked to my room. The rain had started by the time I opened the closet. I didn't have time to cry. I threw my laptop into my backpack, grabbed 3 changes of clothes, deodorant, the charger, a small notebook with scribbled wireframes, and feature lists for Social Bloom. Then I hesitated in front of my dresser and opened the top drawer. An envelope. Inside was $200 in graduation money gift cards from my aunt and grandma, some bills I hadn't spent yet. I tucked it in the backpack like it was worth its weight in gold. No one came to say goodbye. Downstairs, my father stood by the door. "This is your decision," he said without looking at me. "No," I said. "This was yours." I stepped outside. The sky opened up, soaking my hoodie within seconds. My shoes squished on the pavement. My fingers clutched the straps in my backpack, like they were the only thing holding me upright. I didn't have a plan. I didn't even have a place to sleep. But I had code. I had a name for my idea. I had grit. They thought they threw me out. But that night they kicked me forward. The couch was lumpy and smelled faintly of cinnamon and old espresso beans, but it was dry. And Maria didn't ask many questions after I broke down in the employee break room on my second day. "You can stay here," she said, tossing me a pillow. "Just until you figure things out." Maria Reyes, owner of Cafe Luna, was the kind of woman who wore 3 scarves at once and swore by almond milk and moon cycles. She hired me on the spot when I said I could handle the 4 a.m. shift. Maybe she saw the desperation in my face. Maybe she just needed someone willing to mop floors and steam milk without complaining. Either way, she gave me keys to the shop and eventually to her spare key. I worked brutal hours. Up at 3:30 a.m., shift from 4 to noon. Scrubbing, pouring, grinding. After the shop closed, I'd walk back to her small apartment above the bookstore and collapse onto the couch for an hour before pulling out my laptop. The light from the screen was the only glow in that narrow living room. I wrote code until my eyes burned. I skipped dinners to pay for server space. I slept in jeans. I reused coffee filters. My platform, Social Bloom, was still rough, but it was real. It could already scrape engagement trends and schedule posts. It just needed testing and polish and hope. Maria never said a word when she passed by and saw me up at 2 a.m. whispering curse words at broken functions. "You're intense," she said one morning, handing me a stale muffin. "But the good kind." "I have to be," I replied. "This is all I've got." I watched the other baristas go home to families or plans. I didn't tell anyone I lived on a couch. Didn't tell anyone I showered in the shop bathroom or cried when my code crashed. But I kept showing up, and I kept building. Every time I got discouraged, I'd reopen the folder titled First Build and look at the earliest mock-ups from my bedroom back home, the ones my parents never cared to ask about. I wasn't part of any startup incubator. I didn't have investors or mentors, just one girl, a borrowed couch, and a prototype held together by duct tape logic. My startup lived on coffee fumes and Maria's old couch, but it was alive. Maria was the first to believe in Social Bloom without needing a pitch deck. Use my cafe, she said, waving her hand like it was no big deal. If it helps me stop forgetting to post about the matcha latte specials, even better. I integrated her account, scheduled the first batch of content, and let the AI handle trend detection. Within 2 weeks, customer engagement tripled. A food blogger featured us after a perfectly timed post about eco-friendly coffee grinds. Walk-ins doubled. Maria kept hugging me and calling me her resident tech witch. Whatever this thing is, she grinned, keep going. So I did. The beta version was messy, but it worked. I cleaned up the UI, added a dashboard built in real-time analytics, and soft launched it to 5 more businesses. 1 pizza place, 2 yoga studios, a thrift shop, and a tattoo parlor. All local. All word of mouth. By month 4, I had 20 paying clients. By month 8, over 100. Each month I took the profits and poured them back into the platform cloud, hosting cybersecurity patches and a proper website. I learned to invoice. I learned how to explain neural tagging to people who still printed coupons. And I finally moved off Maria's couch. A friend of hers rented out a converted garage on the edge of town for $400 a month. It had peeling paint, a mini fridge, and a bathroom with a leaky faucet, but it was mine. I furnished it with a folding table, a second-hand chair, and a corkboard where I pinned every business card from every new client. Some nights I'd sit on the concrete floor with my back against the wall laptop, warming my legs, and think about that moment in the rain when I walked out of my parents' house. I hadn't spoken to them since. Sometimes I wondered if they ever thought about me, if Ava mentioned me, if they knew I was still standing. But the truth was, I wasn't building Social Bloom for them. I wasn't doing this to say I told you so. I was doing it because I could. I didn't build this for revenge. But success started speaking for me. The first offer came in an email with too many zeros. We'd love to acquire Social Bloom. $2 million. Full buyout. We'll keep your name in the press release. I stared at the screen for a full minute. Then I clicked archive. By then, I had just hired my first developer, Jeremy, a quiet genius I'd met through a Python subreddit. He worked out of his basement in Minneapolis and refused to turn on his camera, but his code was beautiful. Then came Priya, a UX designer with an eye for simplicity and a stubborn refusal to use drop shadows. We were still small, scrappy, but we were building something that actually helped people. I wasn't ready to sell it to a boardroom that only saw dollar signs. The $10 million offer came 6 months later. That one made my chest tighten, but the answer was still no. I didn't want to pay out. I wanted impact. Social Bloom was being used by over 400 small businesses across the country. I launched a mentorship program for teenage girls learning to code. I spoke on a virtual panel for underrepresented founders. I opened an actual office in downtown Santa Barbara, a sleek space with recycled wood floors and giant whiteboards on every wall. The day I closed on the mansion, the realtor asked if I'd like to see the sunset from the balcony. We stood in silence as the sky turned copper and gold over the Pacific. I thought about the girl soaked in rain 3 years earlier, gripping a backpack like a life raft. The front door of that house had closed hard behind me, but this one opened to sunlight, salt air, and silence I didn't have to earn. They closed a door behind me. I opened one with ocean views. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the intercom buzzed. I was reviewing quarterly projections with my operations lead when my security system flashed a notification unknown visitors at the gate. I tapped the screen expecting a delivery or maybe a new client who forgot the code. Instead, I froze. There they were, my parents. My father in a stiff blazer adjusting his tie like he always did when nervous. My mother gripping her handbag like it might fly away. Both older than I remembered, both looking up at the camera uncertain. My thumb hovered over the microphone icon. They hadn't called. No emails, not a single word in 3 years. Just this. A surprise appearance at my front gate, like it was still their world, and I was still their child, waiting to be summoned inside. The intercom crackled. My father leaned in. "We're Naomi's parents," he said, clearing his throat. "We'd like to come in." Behind him, my mother whispered something I couldn't hear. Her eyes searched the camera lens like she didn't know if I was watching. I stood from my chair slowly, walked to the glass doors that led to the balcony, and looked out over the driveway. They were just specks from up here, smaller than the versions I'd stored in memory, smaller than the people who had once loomed over me telling me what I could and couldn't be. My team kept talking in the background, unaware. I reached for the intercom control panel and paused. A few years ago, I would have sprinted to the door at the sound of their voices, would have dropped everything just to be heard. Now they stood outside, unsure if they'd be let in. I used to beg them to see me. Now they waited at my gate. I let them in. The gate swung open without a word from me, and I watched from the entryway as they slowly made their way up the curved stone path. My mother's heels clicked nervously on the slate. My father kept glancing around at the manicured garden, like he couldn't decide if he should be proud or ashamed. The front door opened before they reached it. They both froze for a second when they saw me. "Naomi," my mother breathed as if saying my name would crack the air between us. You live here," "Yes," I said simply. They stepped inside. The marble floors gleamed under their feet. The Pacific stretched endlessly through the floor-to-ceiling windows, catching the sun just right. My laptop sat open on the glass coffee table, displaying revenue dashboards and international market projections. "This is quite a place," my father muttered, clearly overwhelmed. "Thank you," I replied, walking past them toward the kitchen. "Would you like coffee or water?" "Water's fine," my mother whispered, glancing at the modern art lining the hallway like she couldn't tell if it was expensive or offensive. We sat in the living room. The silence was taut. Then it came. "We sold the house," my father said suddenly, setting down his glass. "We've been thinking. This place is so big. Surely you don't need all this space by yourself." My mother jumped in. "We're still family, Naomi. Perhaps we could stay for a while until we figure out our next steps." I stared at them, not in anger, in disbelief. I saw it then, not a visit, not reconciliation, a transaction. They hadn't come for me. They hadn't asked what I'd built, how I'd been, or what I'd survived. They saw a mansion and remembered they once had a daughter. I set my glass down slowly. They weren't here for me. They were here for square footage. I stood up without saying a word and walked down the hall to my office. The air in the living room had gone still, my parents too cautious to follow, maybe unsure if they were allowed to. On the far shelf, tucked between a row of patent plaques and startup competition awards, was a single photo frame. Black border, slightly chipped at the corner. I brought it back and placed it on the coffee table in front of them. Their eyes dropped to it. My mother leaned in first. It was me at 17 sitting cross-legged on the floor of my old bedroom, grinning like I'd just discovered fire. In front of me, a whiteboard full of wireframes, a cheap second-hand monitor, running an early prototype of what would become Social Bloom, and a stack of notebooks with scribbled notes and diagrams. They stared at it in silence. Was this? My father's voice trailed off. The project I finished for him. He nodded. "Yes," I said. "The one I tried to tell you about. The one you dismissed as a phase. The one you laughed at." My mother touched the glass gently, as if the image might change under her fingertips. "You always seemed so distracted," she whispered. "I was building," I said. Neither of them spoke. I watched them closely, wondering if they saw it now, the early version of the empire they had tried to stop. The photo was proof of everything they'd refused to acknowledge: my drive, my ideas, my resilience. "I didn't take much when I left," I said softly. "Some clothes, my laptop, $200. I pointed to the frame. "This is the only thing I took that wasn't a necessity." "Why?" my mother asked, her voice shaking. I looked straight at her. "Because it's the only photo where I looked truly happy. And you're not in it." My father finally broke the silence. "Why didn't you ever call us?" he asked. "Even after you started doing well. Even after all this." His hand gestured vaguely toward the room, the ocean, the empire. I set the photo frame down, looked him in the eye. "Because the only version of me you ever welcomed," I said, "was the one who obeyed you." He flinched. "You didn't leave the door open for your daughter. You left it open for her failure." My mother's eyes shimmered. "Naomi, that's not—" "Yes, it is," I said, steady. "You didn't want to reconnect. You wanted to recover control. But I'm not the girl you kicked out anymore." They exchanged a look, the kind they used to give each other across the dinner table when Ava said something brilliant, when I said something inconvenient. "We want to make things right," my mother said carefully. "Really? You sold your house and came to mine without asking," I replied. "That's not reconciliation, that's strategy." "But we're your parents," my father said. Despite everything, I took a deep breath. "I'm not closing the door on you," I said. "But let's be clear, you're not moving in. You're not retiring here. You don't get to bypass understanding just because we share blood." They sat still, unsure what came next. I walked to the coffee table and turned my laptop screen toward them. Social Bloom's homepage glowed against the glass, clean, modern, data-driven. "If you want to know me now, start here." My mother tilted her head. "What is it?" she asked. "This is what I built. This is what you never asked about." They leaned closer, unsure. "And if you want to be in my life," I said, with all the calm I didn't have at 18, "start with Social Bloom, not my spare bedroom." They left just before sunset. No dramatic speeches, no hugs, no promises. Just a quiet shuffle to the door, their expressions unreadable. My father nodded once. My mother paused like she wanted to say something more, but didn't. I let the door close behind them without looking back. The house felt heavier after they were gone, quieter in a way that wasn't peaceful. I went back to my office and sat in front of my laptop, staring at the open dashboard. For the first time in hours, I exhaled. Later that night, as I was closing out reports and answering client emails, a small notification popped up in the corner of my screen. "New user registration, Linda.Carteret." Followed seconds later by another. "New user registration, Frank.Carteret." I froze, hovered my cursor over the names, checked the email addresses. Confirmed. It was them. They'd signed up for Social Bloom. I didn't message them. I didn't click into their profiles. I didn't even tell Maria when she called to check in. But over the next few days, I noticed the system tracking consistent usage test campaigns, analytic reports, even a few keyword experiments. They were trying, for the first time in 3 years, they were trying to understand something I had built. Not to control it, not to rename it, not to bury it under their expectations. Just to see it for what it was. I never needed their apology. Just proof they were willing to learn. The late light spilled across my office like a soft spotlight, stretching long shadows over the floorboards and the edge of my desk. Outside, the Pacific shimmered like liquid gold waves curling slow and deliberate beneath the Santa Barbara sky. On the desk sat 2 objects that didn't belong together but somehow did. One, a thick glass award etched with Founder of the Year, West Coast Tech Awards. Sleek, cold, precise. the other a battered black photo frame, the back held together with clear tape. Inside it, a snapshot of a different life. Me at 17, eyes bright grinning, surrounded by notes and code. A girl with no plan, no support, but just enough belief to try. I picked up the photo. I remembered that girl. I remembered how terrified she was. How she stood in the rain that night with $200 in graduation money, a single backpack, and no one waiting on the other side of that locked door. I remembered crying in the youth hostel bathroom so no one would hear. I remembered heating ramen in a paper cup at the cafe at 10 p.m. after coding for 6 straight hours on Maria's couch. I remembered the first time Social Bloom scheduled a campaign that worked. The email that said, "This saved me hours, I actually got to eat dinner with my kids." And now there were teams, offices, partnerships, a client in Tokyo, another in Cape Town. Teenagers across the country learning how to code because of a scholarship fund I launched in the name of rejected daughters who did it anyway. I used to fantasize about this house as a monument, a statement, a look what you missed to the people who let me go. But standing in this sunset light, surrounded by everything I built, quiet, steady, earned, it didn't feel like revenge anymore. It felt like something else. Redemption, maybe. Renewal. A home I made with my own hands, my own mind, my own rules. I placed the photo back next to the award. One reminded me why I started. The other reminded me why I never stopped. I wasn't just thrown out. I was launched. And this mansion, it's not revenge. It's rebirth.